Eric, thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Glad to see so many faces. So we had people stationed near the doors with supplies for a little taste test that we're going to do later. If you didn't get one, please see one of these nice gentlemen with the baskets. And if you can't see very well, I encourage you to move closer. There's plenty of room down low, and I won't be upset if you get up at this point. So before we get started with the actual talk, I have a little experiment that's part of our talk today, and I'm going to get it started because it takes a while for everything to develop. So right now, these 4 beakers are just full of water. I'm going to add sugar to this one. And I'm going to add cornstarch to these 2. And then we're going to add a secret ingredient to the one on the left. Oh, but before we do that, we're going to add iodine to all of them and see what happens. Who knows what iodine is? Anybody? So we used to use it a long time ago to clean wounds or to get rid of bacteria. And it's also a fun molecule because of a color reaction it has with starch. So what do you guys notice is different between the water and the sugar and the starch ones? Yeah, go ahead.
I see that the starch ones are turning purple and the other ones are turning black.
Yeah, so these ones have turned kind of a lighter color of the iodine itself, so they've turned yellow, and these ones have turned kind of a black purple. And so our secret ingredient that we're going to add to the last one is saliva. And for that, I need everyone's help because my mouth is kind of dry today. So my assistant, Amria, one of the brilliant nutrition students in our department, is going to walk around with this. And if you are willing, please do offer up a sample. All right. Okay, so I am so glad to be here to talk to you guys today. I think nutrition is one of the most fun sciences to study because we get to study all kinds of really cool, hard science like physiology and biochemistry. We also get to look at how people interact with their environment or like kind of social science topics. And we also get to do gross stuff like this. For those of you coming in, if you didn't get a candy from one of the gentlemen in the basket, please get those, but don't eat them until I tell you to. Maybe raise your hands if you didn't get one. All right. Okay, so we are talking about the digestive system today. And so the digestive system is a system of interconnected organs. And so we're going to start today by talking about the mouth. And then the food travels down the esophagus to the stomach. Oh, right, thank you. Audience participation at its best. All right, so after the mouth, we travel down the esophagus to our stomachs, where it's really acidic, and the stomachs then dump the food into our small intestine, and we've got some inputs there from the liver and the pancreas, and then the small intestine finally ends up in the large intestine. And so we're going to kind of take a walk through those different areas of the of the digestive system. Now, the digestive system has 2 important functions in the body. First, it has to take foods like this delicious piece of cheese and make it into nutrients. So does anybody have any idea what nutrients we'd find in a piece of cheese? Go ahead, just shout out the answer when I ask a question. Yeah, so cheese is made out of milk, so it's high in calcium. Does it have protein in it? And what about fat? Does it have fat in it? All right. It also has a small amount of carbohydrates. It's a good source of vitamin A. as well as a few other vitamins. And it's also a great source of phosphorus, which is another nutrient that we need to keep our bodies strong. So these are all nutrients that our digestive system needs to somehow break apart the cheese and pull it out of there. And then once we've broken it down into nutrients, we need to move those nutrients from outside the body to inside the body. So did you guys know that the inside of the mouth, the inside of your stomach, even the inside of your intestines is actually considered still outside your body? It's true. The food is only into our body once it crosses into the cells of the small intestine, and then from those cells into the bloodstream that takes the nutrients around the body so that we can use them to build our healthy bodies. So before we get started, just because we have so many different ages here, I wanted to start with some key concepts just so everybody's on the same page. And so the first one I wanted to start it out by talking about is what molecules are. And so molecules are groups of atoms that are bound together into the different physical substances that we know in our world. So don't worry, there won't be a quiz on this diagram, but this is a simplified picture of what sucrose looks like. And so sucrose, or table sugar, has carbon atoms, oxygen atoms, and hydrogen atoms in it. And so drawing it like this makes it really easy for scientists to tell what it looks like and what molecules are in it. But in real life, it actually looks a little bit more like this, but it's hard to tell blobs apart, so we keep drawing them in the simple form. And then a special kind of molecule that I want to talk to you about is proteins. And so this is the same as when you've heard about protein in your food. Protein in your food is made up of these protein molecules. And protein are long chains of amino acids, which is the smaller molecule. And they're generally much bigger than something like sucrose. This example here is human hemoglobin. And again, it's very hard to kind of tell what's going on in the blob form, but I think it's really cool to see what these things actually look like if we could see them with our own two eyes. And then I also wanted to make sure everybody knows what a cell is. So a cell is the smallest piece of a living thing that's alive. And so you've probably heard of bacteria before. And so bacteria have one cell, and so the whole thing is what we think of as a cell. And then humans and larger animals and plants will have billions to trillions of cells in them. And so think of that one bacteria cell, but all smooshed together. And so this is a picture of the lining of the stomach if you put it under a microscope. And then if we were able to zoom in right on the edge, these are the cells that we would see, all scooched together. So each one of these blobs, the peach-colored blobs with the purple nucleus in the center, each one of those is a cell. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about was the cell membrane. So this is super important because remember, we need to bring the food into our bodies. So it needs to cross the cell membrane, get into the cells, and then cross the cell membrane on the other side to get into our bloodstream. So you see the line all the way around the outside of the cells? That's the cell membrane. And it's made up of a special kind of fat called phospholipids. And there's kind of this bilayer. So we've got the heads and then the tails point to the middle. And what makes it really cool is it does a great job of keeping the things that we want outside of the cell outside, and the things that we want inside generally, while allowing some things to pass through. So we call it semi-permeable. It lets some things in, but mostly does a great job of keeping things out. So the last concept I want to talk to you guys about is diffusion. So if you were way up in that corner and I took off my shoes and my socks were super smelly and I put them down in that corner, would that person be able to smell them? Eventually. And how would that happen? Any ideas? Yeah, exactly. The smell molecules travel through the air. So when molecules are in an area of high concentration, they naturally want to move to areas of low concentration. So the high concentration is here by the socks at first. People down in this corner can smell them. But over time, they're going to naturally travel until they hit your nose way up in the back corner there. All right, so that's enough terminology. Let's get to the good stuff. So we start with food entering our mouths, which is my favorite organ in the digestive system. So what happens in the mouth?
Chew food, make it saliva.
Yeah, so we chew food. What else happens?
You also break it down?
Yeah, so we're breaking it down into smaller pieces. Yeah. We taste it. Exactly. That's why it's my favorite. All right. So, so there's a lot of different things that happen. Our tongues and our mouth and our teeth all help bring the food into our mouth. And then propulsion, so like moving the food back towards your esophagus, also happens with your tongue. And so somebody mentioned saliva. What is the purpose of saliva? Why do we have saliva in our mouths?
It helps to start breaking down the food with acid.
So it helps start breaking down the food. Other reasons? Yeah. Yeah, so it helps it slide down your throat. This is super important. It helps our food glump together so that our tongues can effectively move it to the back of our mouth, and then it helps it go down our throat to our stomach where it needs to go next. Another thing that saliva has are molecules called lysozymes, which actually work to help break down or kill certain bacteria species. And so this is why when we wake up in the morning, we have morning breath or dragon breath. It's because the saliva hasn't been swishing around your mouth as much, and so the bacteria have a chance to grow, and it's their excrement that you're smelling. So that's why it's super important to brush our teeth not only at night, but also in the morning. All right, so we already kind of talked about saliva. What does it do? So the next thing I wanted to talk about is why is it possible for us to taste? It's such an enjoyable experience, but why does it happen? And so I wanted to tell you guys about a study that was done. It's a pretty cool study. These are newborns who, before they tasted anything else, so they hadn't learned to like certain flavors, except for now we know that they do learn to like certain flavors in the womb, but generally they haven't been exposed to a lot of flavors in their mouth. And the scientists put drops of a bitter substance on their tongue here, and babies have stereotypical responses. So they do what we call gape on the far side there, so that's kind of like I'm trying to get the food to fall out of my mouth. Or they grimace like here. And the opposite kind of thing happens when we put sweet in their mouth. So we'll get a little smile like this, or they'll actually do kind of a seeking behavior where they stick out their tongue like they're looking for more food. And so what this tells us is that liking sweet and disliking bitter are innate. We are born with those qualities. And so why do you think that it's not a learned behavior, it's something that we've evolved? And so why do you think we've evolved that behavior? Go ahead. Yeah, so he said that bad things are usually bitter, so it helps us avoid eating bad things. And what about sweet? Why do you guys think we can taste sweet? Back in the back. Yeah, so we need carbohydrates for energy to help us move our bodies. And throughout most of evolution, calories were hard to come by. And so having enough to keep the body moving was really important. Okay, so how does taste work? Now this is the time to take out your little baggie with your piece of candy in it. Now before you eat it, plug your nose. I'm going to have you put it in your mouth and chew it up for a few seconds, and then pay attention to what you're tasting. And then after like 10-15 seconds, go ahead and unplug your nose, and again, pay attention to what you're tasting as you continue to chew. So what do you guys think? What did you notice about what was different when your nose was plugged versus when your mouth it was open? Yeah, go ahead. And what about then when you opened your nose?
It tasted sweet.
All right, so the taste changed, yeah? Uh-huh. Okay, so this young woman had the grapefruit flavor, and she said that she couldn't taste anything when her nose was plugged, but then when she unplugged her nose, suddenly she knew it was grapefruit flavor. Did other people have similar experiences? Yeah. And so why do you think that is? Do we only taste with our tongues? No? Everybody? No? All right. And that's exactly right. Some molecules we do taste on our tongues. And so things like the sugar molecules or the protons that make things acidic, those things are noticed by our tongue. But a lot of flavor molecules are actually smell molecules. And so you smell them in the back of your nose, here where it attaches to your mouth in the back of your throat. Now, this is another reason why saliva is super important. If you did not have any saliva and you ate a saltine, you probably would not taste very much at all. Because for us to smell those molecules, we need to get them wet. So they swish around our tongue, and so they get aerosolized and move up into our nose so that we can smell them. So yet another reason why saliva is super important. So if you guys remember, we talked about the very edge of cells in the body have these cell membranes on them. So on our tongue, you can see these little bumps, which are called papillae, and in the little bumps are taste cells, and this is a zoomed in close-up picture of the edge of one of the taste cells. And so in the fatty membrane, that's the edge of the cell, here we have outside the cell in the mouth, swimming around in our saliva, we have a sugar molecule. And so this is just a really simple picture of a glucose molecule. And then embedded in our cell membrane are these special proteins called receptor proteins. And you can probably see from the picture that the glucose has a little spot where it can fit in the receptor protein. And so I like to think about the receptor proteins and the molecules working together kind of like a lock and key. So the sugar molecule is kind of like a key, and when you insert it in the receptor molecules, then something happens. We don't unlock a door, but we actually send a signal to the brain. And so the signal travels along our nerves up into the brain and tells us that we're tasting something sweet. And so that's how the majority of our tastes work. So that's how sweet and salty and sour and umami work. But when we taste things, it's not just those things that we're sensing. We're usually also sensing like the texture and the temperature of the meal, and so that contributes to our flavor experience. And you may be surprised to find out that the science of taste is still ongoing. There is room for each and every one of you to make your mark on sensory science if you would like to. So for example, scientists are learning a lot these days about the fact that we can actually taste a sensation called fat. So it's not just the texture of fat, but there's actually a taste receptor like this sugar receptor. Okay, so after we've tasted the food, we've chewed it up and swallowed, it heads down our esophagus. And it doesn't just fall down by gravity. There are muscles that push it down that you can see when people swallow. And then we end up in the stomach. So who knows what happens in the stomach? Go ahead and shout it out. Yes, so you can see in this picture that the stomach is surrounded by all these different layers of strong muscles. And those are squeezing the food and breaking it down to even smaller pieces than what your mouth was able to do. What else happens in the stomach? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so our stomachs produce acid. It's actually hydrochloric acid. And that's really important to start breaking down proteins, to get them to unwind from that big blob that we saw earlier on when we were talking about proteins, so that our enzymes can get after them. So if our stomach is so acidic, how come the stomach doesn't just dissolve? What keeps the acid in the stomach and from going out the rest of the body? Any guesses? We've got one here. Yes, so the stomach lining has special cells that actually produce mucus, just like in your nose. And the mucus coats the inside of your stomach and keeps the acid from attacking the cells. How cool is that? So what about people who get stomach ulcers? Has anybody ever had a stomach ulcer here in the audience? I see one hand in the back. Do you remember, if you don't mind sharing, do you remember how they treated your stomach ulcer?
They gave me pills to control the proton pump.
Okay, so they were trying to decrease the amount of acid that your stomach was producing. And for years, even when I was an undergraduate, which wasn't that long ago, we were taught that the way to deal with stomach ulcers was to decrease the amount of acid in our stomachs. And so you've probably seen in older films the stereotype of, the workaholic who's like chugging Tums or antacids, and that's kind of where that comes from. But the reality is that most stomach ulcers are actually caused by a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. So why for years did everybody think stomach acid was causing it? Well, it turns out way back in the 1950s, a lot of people were arguing about whether stomach acid or bacteria caused stomach ulcers. And so this famous physician examined a whole bunch of stomachs, hundreds of stomachs, and he didn't find any bacteria. And people trusted him, and so they decided, okay, it must be acid. And that's where the science generally trended. However, in the 80s, two scientists doctors are scientists, but two physicians from Australia found this bacteria, Helicobacter pylori, in the stomach of some of their patients with ulcers and decided to treat with antibiotics. And guess what? Their patients were cured. However, they couldn't get any other doctors to listen to them. They couldn't get any journals to publish their findings because everybody was convinced that stomach ulcers were caused by acid. So, turning over opinion in science can sometimes take a long time. And the original doctor who didn't find any bacteria, he wasn't trying to hoodwink us or put one over on us. He was just using the best methods he knew how, and they didn't pick up this specific type of bacteria. So finally, one of the researchers in Australia decided to drink a beaker of Helicobacter pylori. He documented that he didn't have stomach ulcers before he drank it. He documented that he did have stomach ulcers afterwards, and that he was able to cure his stomach ulcers with antibiotics. So a little bit of a media stunt to try to get the rest of the doctors to listen to him in a faster way than he would have been able to otherwise. And he and his colleague went on to win the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2005. All right, don't try that at home. So after the stomach, there is a special valve at the bottom of the stomach that slowly lets food out into our intestines. And so that's the other thing that the stomach is important for, is it stores the food so that our intestines can get it when they're ready for it. And so the small intestines are small, only in diameter. They're about 3 inches in diameter, but they can actually be quite long. So we've got 0 feet marked up here. And depending on how big the person is and the technique that you use to measure their small intestines can vary from 9 feet long all the way to 34 feet long. Can you imagine fitting all of that in your stomach, all tied up? Well, luckily most of us don't have to. That's an incredibly tall person. On average, our intestines are 11 feet long. And so the intestines have two roles. So they continue breaking the food down like we started to in the stomach. And we use special protein molecules called enzymes. And there are some enzymes that happen in the stomach and earlier in the digestive tract, but the main place where they happen is in the small intestine. And some of these are made by the small intestine, and some of these are made by the pancreas. And then there are other molecules that are made by the liver that also help us break up our food. But these special protein molecules, kind of like the receptor molecules, have a special space where they can fit a nutrient that we need to make smaller so that we can bring it into our body. And so in this case, this is a sucrose molecule, so table sugar. So it's got two different sugars bound together, and we need to break them apart before we can absorb them. And so when they fit into the lock of the enzyme molecule, they end up getting broken apart. And so enzymes are really cool molecules. They speed up chemical reactions. So eventually, those two sugar molecules would probably drift apart on their own. But it's going to take a really, really, really long time, longer than our bodies can wait for energy. And so the enzymes help speed up the reaction, and they can either break down molecules like this, or they can build molecules in our body. So there are enzymes in our body that are making hemoglobin for our blood and insulin to help regulate our blood sugar. All of those are molecules that are being made by enzymes. All right, so we saw how long the small intestine is. So if you take those 3 centimeter diameter by 11 feet, or 3 inch diameter by 11 feet long, you get a surface area that's about 3 square feet, a little bit less. But the surface of the small intestine is not smooth. So it is actually covered by tiny fingers that we call villi. And then so on the right, you can see, well, on this side, depends on who's right, but on this side you can see these are actually scanning electron microscope images of these little fingers that line your small intestine. And it's just more zoomed in on the bottom. And then in this cartoon over here, you can see here's the small intestine. We've chopped it in half, so you can see the fingers sticking out. And then on the edge of each of the fingers is a tiny cell, and the tiny cells have even tinier fingers on them called microvilli. So if we think of a car that has to go to a certain distance, if it's on the flat, it has to go a much shorter distance than if it has to go up and down over hills, right? So if we were able to flatten out all of the villi and microvilli in the intestine, how much bigger do you think it would be than if it was flat, than the 3 square feet? Do we think it would be 10 times bigger? Anybody? What about 50 times bigger? 100 times bigger? 200 times bigger? All right, let's see, shall we? All right, so everybody who's sitting on either side of the aisle here, you've been voluntold. Please stand up. And if you could come over here to the bottom. All right. So if people aren't right on the aisle, if they could move over. So take this corner. No, wait.
Oh, there we go.
Just a moment. Take this corner and hand it to the person behind you. And keep handing it to the person behind you and holding on to the part that's in front of you. So keep passing it back, and we'll unroll it, and we'll be able to see the total surface area of the small intestine. So it is actually 160 to 200 times larger than it would be without the villi and the microvilli. It's about, keep rolling, we're almost there, keep passing it up. It's about 320 square feet of surface area. So why is surface area so important? Like, obviously, if we have this much surface area, it must be important for something, right? Any guesses? All right, hold on to the ends down here. Don't pass it any further. Any ideas why surface area is so important in the small intestine? I see one. Go ahead. Digestion, that's right. Over here? Yeah, so the folds help the digestions fit, helps all of this fit in our bodies. So the really important part of digestion is, we've broken it down into those small molecules, but we need to move them into the body. And so the molecules are just kind of randomly moving around in the juices in the small intestine. And the first thing for absorption is they need to contact one of the cells that line our small intestine. So the more surface area we have, the more likely we are to have those nutrients contact the cells. Now don't go anywhere. We're going to do another part of the demo. Can I have 4 or 6 small children come down here, please? Yeah, come on down.
Just come down?
Yeah. Hey, can I have a little slack? Okay, one more. Everybody else sit down, please. Sorry, can't have too many. All right. Can we, yeah, we need just a little bit of slack. Okay. Can you Velcro this in down here? Mm-hmm. Can you help the Velcro stick in down there? All right. Okay. All right, so we have little mock nutrients. So I want you and you and you and you to stand over here, please. Whoop, don't trip on the cord. And then the rest of you come over here, please. And then who's the lucky person who wants to hold the flat version of the small intestine? Okay, come on down. You get to toss balls if you want. All right, so you're going to toss the balls. So you just hold this back here. Nice job. Okay, so you're going to toss the nutrients at the small intestine, at the white fabric, and try to get them in the baskets down below, okay? Okay, on your mark, get set, go. Don't get too close. Don't make it too easy.
Oh no, I got it in the end.
All right. Oh, don't get too close. All right, so this is not a perfect analogy because obviously
They're getting too close.
we are not directly throwing nutrients at our small intestine. They are moving around randomly. But I hope that this has brought the idea home to you that the surface area is really important because it makes it easier for the nutrients to interact with the cells on the edge. All right, thank you all so much for your time. We will go ahead and return the volunteers to their seats. Thank you guys so much. Very nice job. Both teams winners. All right, thank you so much. So after the molecules interact with the cell membranes, they actually need to move through the membrane into the cell, and then from the cell into the blood before we can use them. Thank you so much. We can clean up at the end too. Thank you very much. Very helpful. And so how do those nutrients get across the cell membrane? Well, it depends on what kind of nutrient it is. So we have some small nutrients shown here in purple, and fat-soluble nutrients. So if you think about a vinaigrette, there's the fat layer and then the vinegar layer or water layer. And you can shake them up and they mix, but they're always going to separate back out. And that's because certain things are soluble in fat, certain things are soluble in water, and the two don't mix. And it's really a good thing that they don't mix because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have cells, right? So we've got this fatty layer with water on one side and the other side, and that's what keeps things in our cells. So some things can just diffuse across. So remember we talked about the sock smells and how it moves from high concentration to low concentration? The same thing can happen when we've got high concentration outside the cell. It can diffuse into the cell. And then what about things that aren't fat soluble, that are hanging out in the vinegar or with the water? these are molecules like that, and we have special proteins called transport proteins that help them move through the barrier. In some cases, they're just open channels like this, and in other cases, they're molecules that actually move. So they'll attract a certain type of molecule, and then the protein will actually move and shove it into the cell. So this will happen for nutrients that are really important. So for example, we've got facilitated transport for our amino acids, which are part of proteins, or for our sugars. And then we even have active transport, where the body spends energy to move the molecules. And that'll happen if our concentration gradient isn't right. So you can think of it as a little molecule that helps those smell molecules move from up here all the way back down to where the socks are, which doesn't usually happen naturally. Okay, so once we have it in the cells, we are almost done. We are almost to the point where those molecules can be used to build all the parts of our body. And the last thing that needs to happen is the nutrients need to move from inside the cell to our blood. So there are tiny, tiny little capillaries that go up inside of each of those little villi fingers that I was talking about. So capillaries are very small blood vessels. And so they come in and they pick up nutrients, and then they leave and they go to the liver. And the liver is the sorting house. It makes sure that all the nutrients go where they need to go. It stores some nutrients, it breaks them down, it builds some back up. It's really the soul of metabolism in our body. So once most of the nutrients have been absorbed, the small intestine passes the food on to the colon. And so the colon is much smaller than the small intestine, but it's wider in diameter. And what happens in the small intestine? So it's a little hard to hear. In the small intestine, we absorb the rest of the water that we didn't absorb in the large intestine or the colon. We absorb the rest of the water that we didn't absorb there. It's also the home of the microbiome. So these are bacteria that live inside our bodies. And for years, we thought that they were just there and that they could make us sick if we got them in our food on accident. That's why it's always super important to wash your hands after you go to the bathroom or before you make any food. But we're learning more and more that these bacteria in our colon can actually have really surprising effects on our health. And that depending on which species of bacteria are in our gut, we may be more or less at risk for certain disorders. And so that's another very exciting field of science that is growing, and we're learning more about it every day. It's one of those places where we still have more questions than answers, which I think makes it a lot of fun. Okay, so I'm not sure you guys spat enough in the saliva jar because we don't have a change in color here happening yet. If you want to check back later after you visit the booths, we may actually be able to see the color, but if we had properly calibrated the amount of starch to the amount of saliva, this would actually be starting to turn more of a reddish color, like the sugar or the water. And any guesses about why that is? Yeah.
Because the saliva breaks the starch down?
Yeah, so there's an enzyme in our saliva that actually breaks down starch. So starch is just a long chain of sugar molecules. And so this enzyme, here's a picture of what it really looks like, and here's the cartoon. This enzyme will slowly break off sugar molecules, and the sugar doesn't react with the iodine to turn black. So that's why this will eventually turn a lighter color. And I think that molecule is so interesting for a lot of reasons, but historically in cultures where they didn't have access to a sweetener for their foods, there are actually historical dishes where you put the carbohydrate in your mouth and you chew until it tastes sweet, and then you spit it into the batter to actually make sugar so that you can make a sweet bread. So be glad that you can buy sugar at the supermarket and your grandma isn't pre-chewing your food for you. All right, so we have gone on this long journey from the mouth down to the stomach, through the very long and large surface area small intestine, and then through the colon with the microbiome. And I just want to leave you guys with the thought. So we've been talking a lot about the food and the nutrients that it breaks down into. And the reason why those nutrients are so important is because they are what our body is built out of. Not only are they fuel for our body, but they are actually what we are made up of. So the protein in our skin, in our hair, in our muscles, in our bones is protein that we've eaten. The fat that is the lining of each cell that makes up most of our brain, that's fat that we've eaten. And so when we're thinking about digestion and nutrition and what we eat, the ultimate effect is the health of our bodies and our ability to do all the things we love. So thank you all very much for your time and attention. And I think that there's a brief intermission where people can leave, but I'm here all night. So if you have questions, stay, and I'd love to answer them. Okay, great first question. Is the colon the same as the large intestine? And that is exactly true. They are two different names for the same thing. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So if someone has a nutrient deficiency in their gut, that means that there's not an enzyme that can break that down? Or what would that be?
Sure, so the question is if somebody has a nutrient deficiency, is there not that enzyme to break it down? And that can definitely be one of the reasons. So there are some rare genetic disorders where people have trouble breaking down certain molecules because they're missing enzymes. One of my favorite molecules is vitamin B12. And if you're not able to absorb enough B12, you get pernicious anemia. And that can happen for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons why it can happen is if you don't make a protein called intrinsic factor, which is kind of like the opposite of an enzyme. It actually holds on to the B12 and makes sure your body doesn't digest it and takes it to the place where it can be absorbed. So there's a lot of different reasons why people can end up with nutrient deficiencies, and it's not always about what we're eating. Sometimes it's about our body's ability to process it. Other questions?
So if what our digestive system is trying to achieve is to extract the nutrients, could we conceivably come up at some point with a pill that has all the nutrients we need and then we don't have to eat?
So the question is, could we come up with a pill that has all the nutrients that we need and we don't have to eat? And so this has already kind of been created. It's not a pill, but it's a drink called Soylent Green. Supposedly it tastes disgusting, and I don't know who came up with that name, but it has all of the basic nutrients in it. The problem with trying to recreate foods is that we don't know all about what makes foods healthy for us. So I think a great example of this are special molecules that we call phytochemicals. So you may have heard perhaps of anthocyanins in your grape juice, your red wine. You may have heard of lycopene in tomatoes. And so these are molecules that we are finding in foods that it turns out are really good for our health. They're not necessary, they're not essential in the same way that vitamins and minerals and calories and protein are. But without them, we're at higher risk for certain diseases. And so that's why I always worry about a pill or a drink to solve all of our nutrition problems, is because I just don't think we have all the answers about what is in food that makes it healthy for us. And then the other reason why I think that's a horrible idea is because I love to eat, and I think most people do. And so why miss out on that experience? Other questions? Anybody in the back? All right, well, oh yes, yay.
So you talked
Yeah, so the so the question is about the microbiome and the collection of bacteria that we have, bacteria and other unicellular organisms that we have in our gut and how they affect our health. Basically, did I get that right? It's a little hard to hear down here.
Things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, so mental health as well as...
Oh, sure. So he's bringing up mental health as well as physical ailments. Yeah, definitely. So I think especially some of our common mental health issues like depression and anxiety, we are sometimes referred to as like diabetes type 3 because they are also have a very strong association with inflammation throughout the body. And we think that the microbiome plays a really important role in kind of controlling the inflammation in the body. And so, you know, different disorders are definitely linked to different microbiomes, but we're still learning about exactly which bacteria are healthy and in which amounts. But there's a lot of really fantastic science going on where, you know, you take a sample from somebody who has obesity or diabetes and you transplant it into a sterile mouse and the sterile mouse becomes obese or develops diabetes. So there's obviously a link there. And then there's also really interesting science going on about microbiome transplants. So typically this is being used right now for very hard to treat bacterial infections in the colon, so things that cause horrible diarrhea like Clostridium difficile. And so getting a transplanted microbiome from a healthy individual can actually help get rid of that negative bacteria that's causing the really extreme diarrhea. So there's kind of a lot of interest in ways that we can alter our microbiomes, and it really seems like the best way to alter your microbiome is to change what you are eating. So the bacteria in our guts live on what's left over after we take out most of the nutrients, and it really seems like the best way to get a healthy microbiome is to eat more fiber. And so that's your whole grains, that's your fruit, that's your vegetables. And so, you know, what nutrition science has been telling you for years, we have yet more evidence that it is the truth. Yeah.
Do you recommend people eat a probiotic, whether it's through yogurt or a pill or?
Yeah, so the question is whether I recommend that people eat a probiotic, whether it's through yogurt or a pill. And so the thing that I have a hard time with, especially with the pills, is that we just don't know exactly which species are super healthy. And there's not a lot of great evidence that the species in the microbiome actually take over and colonize your gut. They are present as long as you keep taking the pill. So I think if people have GI distress that is bothering them, I think it's something definitely worth trying. It might work, it might not. I think foods like yogurt or kefir or kimchi have a lot of beneficial effects. And so if you enjoy those foods, eat them. And if they help your stomach stay more regular, all the better. But we don't have definite answers. And I'm definitely not going around to everybody and being like, you need to start drinking kombucha, just because. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the immune system that I've been exposed to that is in the gut. Now, does the gut mean in the stomach and the intestine?
The immune system that's part of the gut? So typically, the immune system that's part of the gut, we think of it the most in the small intestine as well as large intestine, but it's really throughout. You know, there are immune cells making sure that, you know, the food that we eat is covered in bacteria and viruses and stuff like that. And so making sure that those things don't get in if we don't want to get them in. There's kind of cells all throughout doing that for sure. But when we think of like kind of interactions between like the microbiome and the immune system, then we're definitely talking about the large intestine or the colon. So how do we keep the immune system healthy? Yeah, so definitely our immune systems function better if they have the appropriate nutrients that they need to make the cells. I think a lot of our immune system functioning also happens when we're younger. And to be honest, this isn't an area of my specialty, and I don't want to explain to you when I don't know. But I think that's a really great question, and I'd love to know more about it.
How long does the whole journey take, typically, from the mouth to the mouth?
Oh, so it's so different for different people. A really fun experiment that you can do, which we can't do within the confines of our time here, is to not eat corn for several weeks, and then eat a can of corn, and then closely examine your bowel movements for corn. And when you see it come out, then you'll know how long it took to go through your specific digestive system. But yeah, it can really differ quite a bit depending on exactly what you've eaten that day. For example, insoluble fiber makes things move through a lot faster. Soluble fiber, like what's in oatmeal, kind of slows things down a little bit. And then just what's going on with you physiologically. So pregnant ladies, for example, everything slows way down. It takes forever for things to move through. Yeah, I recommend that experiment if you've never done it. It's fun. Any last, okay.
I've been told that if I'm taking protein, I should take a lot of fiber to help absorb the protein. Is that true? And doesn't matter what type of fiber?
So the question is, if you're taking a protein supplement, should you also take fiber with it to help absorb the protein? And I do not think that that is true. Generally, fiber does a lot of great things in our body, but generally it doesn't help us absorb nutrients. Typically, it's the opposite. So like there are nutrients in certain vegetables that can bind vitamins that we need or minerals that we need and make it so that our body can't access them because we don't really break down fiber. But I don't want to dissuade anybody in this room from eating more fiber because Americans need to eat more fiber. We generally only eat like 10 to 13 grams of fiber, and the recommendation is 25 to 28 grams of fiber. So we're way off that recommendation. And so what does fiber do for us? It fills us up. It helps us keep us full for longer. It provides bulk in our meals. It slows down digestion, so we don't have like a huge blood sugar spike and then a fall off. And it also keeps our colon clean. You can think of it as like a little scrub brush going through your colon. And it picks up the carcinogenic molecules that we don't want in there causing colon cancer, and it helps us eliminate them. So yeah, more fiber. It also helps keep you regular. So, other questions? Sorry.
So, say when we like eat like a really greasy burger or something,
Uh-huh.
do you feel kind of like super sluggish and like kind of sick almost? Like what is it that makes you feel that?
Yeah, so a few things can make you feel sick after eating a big meal. There's just distension that happens, and that comes with discomfort. The stomach has those little ripples in the inside of it you probably saw in the diagram called rugae, and those allow the stomach to stretch quite a bit. But if it's a lot further than it usually stretches, then there are kind of pain receptors in there that will tell you that things are uncomfortable. Feeling sluggish can happen for a lot of different reasons. I think one of the reasons that we like to think about is the fact that, blood is being diverted to our digestive system to deal with that meal. Of course, if an axe murderer breaks into your house after Thanksgiving, your blood doesn't stay in your digestive system and you don't stay sluggish. It moves to where you need it in your body. But definitely if you're in a situation where you can just kind of like hang out and digest your food, the blood is going to move to your digestive system to concentrate on that task. Great question. Thanks.
So I know that a lot of people have a hard time digesting foods like beans and gluten. Why is that?
Sure. So people have a hard time digesting certain foods like beans and gluten. So I'm going to address that in two parts. So foods like beans and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli or cabbage tend to have fibers in them that we can't absorb as humans. And so they end up in our colon and they feed our bacteria. And so that's where that discomfort comes from. The bacteria are like, yum, and they eat it, and they pass a lot of gas, which makes you bloated and uncomfortable, which causes the discomfort that comes with those foods. And so the way to deal with that, Beano is a very effective, it's an enzyme that will break it down in your small intestine so that you absorb those nutrients and they don't go to your bacteria. Or, you can kind of start small and slowly build up. And so the idea is that your gut microbiome will slowly change over time to allow you to eat more of those foods. Because, beans are really one of nature's superfoods, and we don't want to avoid them just because they make us a little gassy. Now, gluten, there is a specific disease called celiac disease, and it is where the body's immune system is triggered by gluten, and it actually attacks the inside of the small intestine. So those fingers we were talking about, they actually end up getting flattened, which makes it so that we can't absorb the nutrients that we need, and people get really sick. And so that's why some people can't digest gluten and need to avoid it. Recently, there's been a lot of interest in people who, although they don't have celiac disease, like when we take a picture of their small intestines, we don't see that flattening, they still feel like they have a reaction to glucose or gluten. So it might cause them to have headaches or a lot of various kind of non-specific symptoms. And it seems pretty clear that this gluten sensitivity is a thing. So when we have people do elimination and trial diets and they bring gluten back into their life, it does seem to cause the symptoms. The thing that I would really encourage people, if they think that they are sensitive to gluten, is to do a well-controlled elimination and trial diet where you try to take out all the foods that you might be reacting to, and then you slowly add them back in one by one, because there's been some really good research done where they have tested people who felt that they were sensitive to food, and although the majority of the participants were actually sensitive to a food, a very small percentage of them, like 10%, actually had it right which food they were sensitive to, right? So they thought they were sensitive to gluten, but they were actually sensitive to dairy. Or they thought they were sensitive to dairy, but they were actually sensitive to eggs. So because we eat food in these combined forms, it can often be really difficult to tell exactly what's causing our symptoms. And then, the vast majority of people don't need to avoid gluten, which is great because gluten makes bread delicious. It really provides a texture that's not there. And a lot of the gluten-free foods are actually not as healthy for us as the gluten-filled foods. So wheat, especially whole wheat, provides a lot of really important nutrients to our bodies. So if we can eat it, it's better to eat it. Other questions? Okay, that'll be it. Thank you guys so much for your great questions.